What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Phase 1 podcast. Happy to be here. I'm going to spend a little bit of quality time with my friend Mark. We got connected a few months ago, algorithm doing its thing on Instagram, and we connected. We had a Zoom chat about over a month ago. So here we are, we're push and play on life. So this is cool because for me, I appreciate when the algorithm does its thing in a healthy way. And now I get to have a conversation with someone I've really only talked to for about 20, 30 minutes one time. So this is really cool because what I know about Mark is that he does have a story he's willing to share. And that's what I really appreciate and respect about you, is that you are willing to share your ups and your downs as well, and your hurts. And the hope is that someone on the other end, if you're tuning in for the first time, what we like to do is share our stories to give you the opportunity to relate to other people and acknowledge that we've all been somewhere before, and that could have been from a dark place. But there's light at the other end of darkness. Sometimes the only way out is through. And once you get to the other side, now we have an opportunity to get on our mission. And Mark's going to share that as well. So he's got a lot of things he's working on that he's going to share with us. And then, like we always do for this platform, is we're going to wrap this up with words of encouragement. That's the message to all of you, especially if you're going through a hard time. We're just going to fire hose you with words of encouragement. So I hope you're all ready to lean into that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a seat, take a step back, and Mark, I'm going to let you take the reins. And before I do, I just want to say thank you. I know that we've only had a chat for about 20, 30 minutes one time, and it could be a challenge. It could even be uncomfortable to share your raw reality with someone you've met for a brief time, but I know you are willing and vulnerable, and I appreciate that about you. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And what I would like to hear from you, what we would like to hear from you, is those significant moments in your life that brought you to the mission that you're on right now.
Okay. Well, my name is Mark Kneebone. I'm 51 years old. I'm a former law enforcement officer, metropolitan Pittsburgh area for 12 years. 9 of that was in patrol. 3 of that was in narcotics and vice. I am a recovering alcoholic with PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And all around, I am pretty much a hot mess, but I've just celebrated 2 years sober. Thank God.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to accomplish that. But yeah, so born in Eastern Pennsylvania, out by Philadelphia, went through 2 divorces by the time I was 17. My mom and dad got divorced when I was like 4, and then she remarried and got divorced when I was 17. My mother was a very difficult person. She was a great mother when she was balanced, but when she wasn't, she could be very manipulative to me and my sister, and very, very emotionally damaging. So I grew up in a household where you never knew which one was coming out, and I think that's pretty standard anymore. There's a lot of mental health, and there's a lot of families that are struggling. So luckily enough, my mother married a great man in her second marriage, my stepfather, who just passed away about 2 months ago. God rest his soul.
Mm-hmm.
He took over the reins when I was about 5 years old, and he taught me everything I knew and everything I know about how to be a man and how to be a good human. Now, unfortunately, it took me 49 years to learn that his teachings were what kept me from giving up. It kept me from giving into the darkness. And, he came into a family where he had 2 of his own kids, and then he had 2 stepkids, and the kids didn't get along. So that was an added stressor to his marriage. They got married fairly quickly. I think they dated for 6 months and then got married because they were in something that I don't even know if it exists anymore. It's called Parents Without Partners. It was like a social organization, kind of like AA deal. But you go in there if you're single, looking to meet normal people and, make connections. They met, they dated for 6 months, they got married, and then he took over the craziness. And that man was a freaking angel. because the stuff that he had to deal with, me and my brother fighting all the time, my sister and my stepsister fighting all the time, my mother coming down on him all the time. Long story short, we spent our childhood watching a volatile relationship. And not on my stepfather's part, because he tried to, he lost his shit sometimes, right? Nobody's perfect. But he tried to keep everything together for the kids. And granted, two of the kids weren't even his. Fast forward, like I said, he just died 2 months ago. We still talk. I still call him dad up until even when I refer to him, I call him dad. So, he was the one that got me involved in sports and all the productive things in my life and tried to put me on the right path, which I so righteously fought tooth and nail. 16, 17 years old. I'm in public school. I get kicked out of school for fighting. I was bullied all the time. So pretty much every day I was fighting somebody, the football team, the basketball team, the soccer team, it didn't matter, and when I say the team, I mean the entire team. Mm-hmm. They would show up on my front yard with baseball bats, and my dad would have to go outside and try to scare them off and get them off the yard because they wanted to whoop the shit out of me. So, I learned how to fight at a very young age, and I learned how to push things down and how to just do what I needed to do to make it through the day. I get kicked out of public school. I go to a little Catholic school here in Pittsburgh, graduating class of 41. And I meet a girl who goes on to be my first serious girlfriend. And, I think I'm 17 at the time. And, one day we go out and she has Crazy Horse. I don't know if anybody knows about that, but it's a malt liquor that came out in the 90s. It was a glass painted bottle, and it was the nastiest stuff you could ever drink. It was like drinking motor oil and turpentine mixed together. And, all my self-esteem issues and all my mommy and daddy issues and all the things that I had pushed down up until that point, after I took that first drink, they didn't exist. It's just something changed in that moment. And so I became a heavy drinker right out of the gate. It started off, drink on the weekends. Then it was drink in the car before school. Then it was drink in the car during lunch break at school. Then it was drink going to school, drink at lunch, drink on the way home. And then when I graduated in, I think, 1992, holy shit, that's a long time ago. 1992, I graduate high school and I go to college. I stay with the same girl. Unhealthy relationship, just like every other one that I've ever had, up and down here and there, break up, get back together, break up, get back together. But very quickly into my college career, I got attached to a fraternity. First, it was just hanging out with the dudes. And then it was like, hey, bro, why don't you join? I was like, I'm not paying for my friends. He's like, you're paying for a party. I was like, well, okay, that's different. I'll do that. So I joined a fraternity, and now I'm drinking every day. I'm not going to class. I found out very quickly that I am a visual, auditory, and touch learner. Mm-hmm. I have to feel the papers in my hands. I have to see them. I have to write them. I have to hear everything. I have to, I just have to repeat over and over again. So I would sit in my little 8x8 room, because in college I lived in a closet. Mm-hmm. It was a closet that I built a loft bed in there with a desk underneath of it. And all I had in there was a desk, a dresser, and a refrigerator. And, I learned very quickly that if I drank and just went over my notes repeatedly, I would pass all my tests. So after the first year, I had got this system down where I took tests drunk, I gave presentations drunk, I studied drunk, and I ended up graduating with honors. And I never went to class because, once again, I had learned a secret. I had learned a tool that I could use to get things done, and that was booze. So fast forward, I graduate college in 1997. And at this point, I don't even know what the hell I'm going to do with my life. I'm just partying. I'm sleeping on couches after I graduate. I'm just working any job I can get, trying to figure out what I can do. Anything from door-to-door sales to remodeling bowling alleys to, heavy construction, plumbing. It didn't matter. I just needed to make money. So I did that for a while. And then I think it was 2001, I got a job with a company that remodeled bowling alleys. And we had just started a job in Brooklyn, New York. And we would drive in on a Sunday over the weekend, get in there late, early in the morning. We'd work all weekend and we would drive back to Pittsburgh and stay for a day and a half and then go back out. It was our first week doing this job. And what happens? 9/11.
Mm.
And we are 6 miles from ground zero at a bowling alley with about 350 people in there, all locals, doing their early morning bowling leagues. And, we hear a news flash about, they thought it was a Cessna that hit the tower. Like some guy that went the wrong way and smacked into the tower. And then everything started to become clear. And, it was one of the most surreal moments in my life was when people started to realize that this was not an accident. And I looked around the room and you've got, 300 people crying and falling out on the floor and losing their minds because they either had family in the towers or they knew someone that worked in that complex. And now they're watching this thing go up in smoke. And, it's still hard to talk about because one of the traumas that has led me to where I am. But I couldn't do anything. I was helpless. I'm an outsider. I'm not part of that team. I'm not the home team. And, when it was all said and done, I mean, we were locked there for like a day and a half. We had no cell phone service. We couldn't call our families to let them know if we were okay. We couldn't leave the city. So like we just sit there all day and just finally decide we got to do something. So we walk to our hotel. And while we're walking to the hotel, a piece of paper falls on the ground and it's burnt all around the edges. And now imagine this image. You're walking down a city in New York City and all you see when you look up is glitter because it's glass and metal and paper and all these pieces of the towers are just floating around in the air. And this paper falls down on the ground and it's burnt around the edges and it's an eagle with the arrows and the wheat, the logo. And my buddy picked it up and we continued on to this bar where we got probably one of the top 3 drunkest moments in my entire life. And we're like hugging and kissing and like New York City people are probably some of the toughest human beings on the planet, but they're also some of the most giving and loving people because they took us in like we were family. And we spent that night with them, came back, finally got out of there. And I quit the job as soon as I got back to Pittsburgh. I was like, I am never going back to New York City because my solution was to eliminate the issue and not take care of the problem. Eliminate the environment, but not deal with the problem. Fast forward, I'm working different jobs. I start driving a truck and I'm living on couches and I'm moving around a lot. And I don't even think I had an apartment at the time. When I hit 33, I was like, I got to do something with my life, man. I'm just floating around here. Like I have no security. My mental status is a mess. My financial status is a mess. Physically, I'm a mess. So a buddy of mine had just joined a police department here in Pittsburgh and he was like, hey, they're hiring. And I'm like, bro, I don't think there's a chance in hell of me getting that job. Like I've tried every drug under the sun, minus things that you inject into yourself. I partied a lot and I wasn't a real serious person. And he's like, dude, you can't take orders from anybody. So you being a cop is probably the best thing you can do right now. So I took the test and it was funny. There's about 1,000 people took the test. Like I said, I was 33 at the time. I tested number 33 out of 1,000 people. So then goes into filling out the application, which is, 150 pages of your entire history. And I'm adding multiple pages of addresses. I'm adding multiple pages of jobs because at this time I think I had about 45 jobs since 1997. So you're talking, this is 2007 at the time. You're talking 10 years. I worked more jobs in my career than most families work in their lifetime. So I take the test. I test 33. I'm ready to quit filling out the application because it's just like I'm lying about everything. Like I'm lying about my drug usage. I'm lying about this. I'm lying about that. And then my buddy, I talked to him. I got the thing. The application's in the trash can right now, and he's like, "Bro, like just do it, man. Just do it. Just do it." So I'm like, "Fuck it." So I start all over. I fill the whole thing out. I send it in, and I get the job. So I start working as a Metropolitan Police officer in 2007. Worked in several different parts of the city, and ended up in an area that they call the Fighting Fifth, which is Zone 5 in the Pittsburgh area, and that is a very ethnically diverse area. You've got a little bit of everything, but it's also very, very poverty stricken. There's not a lot of money in that area. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of things going on for people to make money that aren't legal. So I'm working there, and April 4th of 2009, 3 of the guys that I work with got murdered on a call. It was a domestic call, and the first officer, their names are Paul Shulo, Eric Kelly, and Steve Maley. God rest their souls. You guys are angels and warriors. We miss you every day. They show up. The first officer shows up. He gets shot as soon as he comes to the door. Then he gets executed gangland style with a bullet in his head. Second officer arrives. He sees the first down. He presses the fight. He goes in, takes a couple rounds, continues to press the fight to the bad guy. Meanwhile, he's completely outgunned because the guy's got assault rifles and he's using a Glock. Because at the time, the department I worked with didn't issue rifles and didn't allow you to carry a rifle. So he was just outgunned. He got executed. And then the third officer showed up on his way home. He wasn't even working. And he got hit getting out of his car multiple times and ended up bleeding out in the middle of the street. I have a lot of survivor's guilt over that because I had just gotten off work, and the partner I had at the time, we worked what was called the wagon. And the wagon is, it's a van, and you go around doing transports, and usually you get sent to like every domestic call. There was a high chance that if we were working, if we stayed a little bit longer, that would have been our call. So it took me a very long time to deal with any of that. And my drinking really took off at that point. I was drinking mass quantities every day. I'm married. My marriage is going to shit because I'm drinking all the time. I've become this cold, disconnected, unfeeling human being that didn't give a shit about anything but getting to the bottle at the end of his day. So fast forward, I work the city until in 2016, 17, I went to narcotics and vice, plainclothes position. And the majority of what we did there was investigating opioid overdoses. And I think I snapped at that point. I think I just had enough, going and seeing dead bodies all the time and knowing that nothing I did meant shit to anything. And nobody got arrested. Nobody stayed in jail. It was so hard to persecute someone for dealing a fatal dose of heroin because you had to tie it piece by piece all the way back to that person. And then a lot of times the cases weren't strong enough, even though you knew it was the guy, but you couldn't get him. So I remember my last shift, it was a Saturday because we were off Sundays and Mondays. We were rolling in the north side of Pittsburgh, and we saw this car that had, weed smoke. You could tell it was weed. You could smell it, the taillights out, from an area outside the city of town, which is notorious for coming down to buy drugs or sell drugs. And we get behind that car, and, it takes off, and we're in an unmarked vehicle, so we can't lead a pursuit. We would have to call it out, wait for a marked car to get there to take over the reins, and then we could follow behind. But my partners are like, let's call it, man. This is just not a good idea. And I'm like, I agree, but I was like, let's put this out over the radio to every department on this corridor and let them know that this is a stop. Like we've already got the reasons to stop them. They don't need anything but our word. And instead of doing that, my partners are like, let's just call it a night. And I think at that point I was like, I'm over this. So I went home. I called my boss, told him I needed a couple days off. And 48 days later, I came back in and handed my resignation letter in. And that was it. Never worked another shift. Now, granted, one of the best decisions I've ever made in my entire life for my mental health and for my recovery. But the reasons are so dumb. Like I was so tied up in my addiction, my alcoholism, that I wasn't thinking logically. I was thinking with emotion. And I was like, oh, I don't like this anymore. Not, hey, can you do it for another 8 years and get your pension? Because that's all I had to go to get a pension. And, I never thought about it logically. I never thought like, hey, if you can stick it out for 8 years, go do patrol, go see if you can get a desk position, do whatever you can to stay in and get it done. I was like, no, fucking, I'm out. And I went back to driving a truck. And that's what I do now. So fast forward a little further. I'm driving trucks for different companies. At this time, I'm drinking, a fifth a day easy. I'm going through my divorce in 2019, 2020, and I'm living about a half hour north of Pittsburgh. And I'm all by myself in an area where I initially, with my alcoholic brain, thought that it would be good to eliminate the environment once again. But there's one thing you always take with you, and that's yourself. And all my problems came with me. All my demons came with me. And I would just sit in my apartment for days on end drinking. I had bottles strapped underneath the hood of my car. I had them everywhere. My apartment was a mess all the time. I wasn't eating. I wasn't showering. I wasn't, I was going to work, and that was it. And when I did go to the gym, I was drinking, 20-ounce tumbler of vodka with an energy drink in it, just to keep moving. So I'm doing the driving thing, and I'm basically hungover every day. Didn't drink before I went to work, but I got fucked up every night. So, I'm literally living hungover. Um, I start dating a girl shortly after my divorce, and that's just a very bad relationship. Great girl, great kids. She had 2 kids that are phenomenal. But it was like pouring more gas on a fire. Like literally, that's how bad it was. It started off good. And then as time went on, the affection left, the arguing started, the drinking before I went to see her started. And I stuck in that for 2.5 years. I mean, I should say we both stuck in it for 2.5 years because it wasn't good for her either. But finally I think it was the end of April of 2023, we ended it. And I mean, I was pretty hurt by it. I mean, I had to do it, but it was on me to make the decision because she told me, it's like, listen, this is your call. And I was like, we got to stop this because we're just killing each other, and at that point I'm drinking a half gallon a night, on the days off, I'm drinking 5 and 6. Like I'm spending 300, 400, $500 a week on booze. I'm not doing anything at this point. I don't care about anything. Like I'm just going to work in autopilot. And it's scary to say that I was driving a truck hungover all the time because with my anxiety and my depression and my PTSD, I always like to say one of the things I don't want to ever do again is spend 24 hours alone with somebody I can't stand. And that's what I was doing with myself. I hated myself. I hated everything I was doing. And, sitting in that truck for 400 miles a day in just panic mode, fight or flight constantly, it wore me down to the point where, about a week after we broke up, I don't remember why I talked to her, but I think it was because, if I remember correctly, and granted, a lot of things are kind of fuzzy around that time. So I believe I had called her because I was asking for help, because I was drinking really heavily and I just needed somebody to talk to. And she goes, well, I really can't talk. I've got a date. And I was like, we just broke up a week ago. We were together for 2.5 years. We said the I love yous and all that shit. And after that phone call, I just snapped. That was it. That was the beginning of the end. And it took about a day, because I don't know if you know what White Claw surges are. There's 8% malt liquor, little 10-ounce cans, and I was drinking those nonstop. I was drinking, I think it was like a 4-day bender. And I remember going to my gun case and grabbing my Glock 43, checking the slide, making sure it was unloaded, putting a magazine in and chambering around and sitting back down on the couch. And that's the last thing I remember. I woke up the next day. My apartment looked like Fallujah. It looked like bombs had gone off everywhere. And I immediately got on the phone with my former partner from the narcotics division. I was like, hey man, like I'm fucked up. Like I need help. And he wanted to 302 me, which in Pennsylvania, Allegheny County, 302 is a mandatory commitment to a mental facility for 72 hours. And I was like, bro, if I didn't already call a rehab center, I would go. So I was on a plane a day and a half later to Delray Beach, Florida, where I went to rehab for 44 days. And I just drank the whole time. I drank that day and a half. I got drunk because I had to maintain the buzz, because if I let it go, my nerves would be all over the place. So my buddy Mark drives me to the airport the day of the flight, and I break down. At this point, I'm completely broken inside. I basically collapse at the airport, and he has to hold me up, and I'm just crying like a 4-year-old who just lost his dad. I can't think. I'm like, I don't know what the hell's going on. And he's just like my rock. He's like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Just get on that damn plane. You're going to be okay. So I get to the airport. I'm in the airport and I start drinking. Of course. Why not? And I had a layover in Baltimore, and then I would fly from Baltimore to Delray, West Palm Beach. So we have a 4-hour delay in Baltimore. So what does an alcoholic do when he has a 4-hour delay in an airport? Just pounds alcohol, right? So I get on the connection flight out of Baltimore finally, and I think it's like an hour and a half flight, and I'm in the back seat, all the way in the back by where you go to take a shit, and I've got the Alcoholics Anonymous big book, that thick, blue and yellow cover, says Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm reading it while I'm double fisting Jack Diet and Diet Coke, or Jack Daniels and Diet Coke at the back of the plane, like 2 at a time. Wham, wham, wham. Hey, can I have 2 more? Oh, this is really cool. I mean, I'm going to be doing this for the next however long. And I get off the plane, and I'm met there by a young lady who is my ride to the rehab facility. Get to the rehab facility around 11 o'clock at night, and it's nothing like what I thought it was going to be. It was a bunch of zombies wandering around at 11 o'clock at night with no rules. So I immediately realized that this is not the place for me. I'm not going to get sober here. So I detox there for 7 days. And while I'm there, I'm researching other facilities. And I end up finding this facility called Transformations Treatment Center in Delray Beach, Florida. And I call them and set up the ride. So I get a detox like 8:30 in the morning, and I'm on a van at like 9:30, going 30 miles up the road. Check into transformations, and I'm in the intake where you sign away your life. And a guy comes in there who ended up being my roommate. His name's Matt Brooks. We just did an episode with him a couple weeks ago. He comes in and he gets introduced as, a guy that's been here, and, he's going to help me through and help guide me through the process. So he and I immediately became like best friends. And 4 days after I got there, we were roommates. So we spent all our time together. He's former military. He had been in and out of rehab 11 or 12 times. So he was like my rehab guide. This is what you do in rehab. This is what you got to prepare for. This is how the place runs. And we became like brothers. And to this day, we're still best friends. And we still talk, as often as we can. He's had his own issues with recovery. But in transformations, I was exposed to a lot of things that I didn't know existed. One of those things is ART and EMDR, which are trauma therapies that you can go through with a therapist, where they try to work you through the traumas to try to alleviate some of the negative feelings that you have. If anybody's thinking about doing trauma and early childhood work, EMDR, ART are amazing. I can't guarantee anything because I'm not smart enough to know how it works, but I do know that after I did 3 sessions of ART and EMDR, I had found some resolution in some of my traumas, some of my deeper seated traumas. Now, granted, they're still there, right? Like, they don't go away. It's just now, the philosophy behind these things is to take the negative connotation of the moment and try to put a positive spin on it so that when you think about it, it doesn't take you to the same place. Another therapy was called neurotherapy, where they, it's basically they map the brain waves as they move through your brain and determine what's going on inside your head. And I think it was like you put this goofy thing on your head and you have to stare at a wall for like 20 minutes. And then you have to stare at the wall with your eyes closed for 20 minutes, take a bunch of cognitive tests. And they came back and, everything's red, green, and yellow, right? Like standard colors. And they're like, most of your stuff is in yellow. Some of it's in red and very little is in green. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? You're talking to an idiot. And they're like, you're in fight or flight 24/7. I was like, that makes sense. Why? Well, they're like, every thought you have, every process you have, whether it's cognitive thinking, complex problem solving, sex, happiness, anything, it's getting derailed and going straight to PTSD, anxiety, depression, fight or flight. And the light went off. Like, there's something actually physically wrong with what Mark Kneebone is. And it was awesome and both scary at the same time, because now I had a target. They're like, you have severe depression, severe PTSD, severe anxiety. And I'm like, okay, let's get a plan of action together to go after this shit. For the longest time, I just thought I drank because it was who I was. And It was more, I was drinking to quiet all the other shit that was going on. So my alcoholism was just a symptom of mental health issues. And I think that's very prominent in the addiction community, that I would say every person that suffers from an addiction has some type of mental health. Now, it doesn't go the other way. Not every person with mental health issues has an addiction. But I do believe mental health is the foundation next to the, everybody believes in, genetics and whatnot. I just think it's honestly, it's mental health, and it's untreated mental health leads us down a path that is just self-destructive. And there's other factors, of course, but for me, that's what it was. So I went through this neurotherapy for the next 4 weeks, where every day for about 20 to 30 minutes, they would put a cap on my head that had electrodes, and they would play these, it's called binaural beats, frequency waves through music. And you would sit there and just rest and close your eyes and just sit there and do this therapy and let it do its thing. And then they would reevaluate you every week. And when I left treatment, that treatment center, 37 days later, everything was in green. I mean, it was so amazing to see it on paper. I'm like, what are you telling me? There's no way I'm normal, because I've never been normal. And they're like, you are now functioning based off logic rather than emotion. And a person your age, who we call normal, that's where you are right now. And I was like, this is a fucking miracle. Like, there's no way. I couldn't believe it. 2 years later, I'm still sober, and I still have good mental health because I've got these practices that I've put into place. So they asked me if I'm ready to leave treatment, and I'm like, no, I don't want to leave. And I ended up staying an extra 2 weeks just to prepare to come home. And then I come home to Pittsburgh on July 18th of 2023. And I come home to not being able to work. I haven't talked to any of my friends really in almost 2 months. My apartment's a mess, and I have no plan of what I'm to do, because I thought I was going back to work when I got home. And that was nixed right out of the gate when they told me I had to do all this after treatment and evaluations before I could come back to work. So I had an extra month and a half off. So you're talking 3 months of sobriety, a month and a half in a controlled environment, a safe bubble, and a month and a half where I'm left to my own devices. And I honestly think that if it didn't play out that way, I would not be sober today, because, if I went back to work, I would have just tried to get back to where I was, because everybody always says, I want my life back. I want my life back. I don't want that life back. I want a new life. I want to start over. So I dove into my recovery immediately. And I think I did over 100 AA meetings in the first 30 days. They have this thing called 90 and 90, where they want you to do 90 meetings in 90 days. I did that in a month. And I moved out of my apartment. I sold my car because, triggers, got to eliminate triggers. Moved back down to the city, which was good for me. And I think it was May, June, July, August. I think it was September or something around there. I was talking to a buddy of mine, Scott Sieverts. He has the Berm Pit podcast out of Pittsburgh. And he had just gotten signed by a network where he was getting paid. And I texted him like, hey, bro, like, congratulations, man. You deserve all the best things in the world. If you ever want a mentally ill ex-cop with a drinking problem, let me know. And I got a text message back. He's like, when do you want to do it? And I was like, oh, shit. Now I got to put my money where my mouth is. So I go on his show and I do an episode with him. It's the Berm Pit, BERM, Pit, PIT podcast, episode 42. And it's the first time I ever told parts of my story to anyone other than my therapist. And I did it on a podcast on the internet with no way to hide what I say. And after that, I was sold on the podcast issue. I was like, I got to start my own. That's it. I got to do it. So backtrack a little bit. During my recovery, this first few months home, one of my best friends, Kenny Finnegan, God rest his soul, he died June 1st of last year in a motorcycle accident. He was my at-home rehab buddy. I called him every day. We talked every day, multiple times a day. He had mental health issues. He had his own addiction issues. And, he was one of my biggest supporters while I was in treatment. And when I came home, he's like, dude, we got to do something with this. Like, you're sober. I'm not gambling. I'm dealing with my stuff. You're dealing with your stuff. Let's do something like bigger. I'm like, what do you mean bigger, man? Like, what, you want to go like set up a table at the mall and talk about recovery? I mean, what are you talking about? He's like, well, maybe we should do an interview, like you and me interview each other. I'm like, no, I don't like to talk. I don't like to tell people about my deepest, darkest secrets. And he's like, let's do a podcast. And this was after I did the other podcast. I'm like, well, shit, that's a pretty good idea. So we start doing the groundwork, I start buying all the shit and buying all the wrong shit and, trying to do this on my own. And, Kenny and I end up having these on and off again fights where like 1 minute he's part of the podcast, the next minute he's not. And, I'm like, what the hell's going on here, bro? Like you and I started this thing together. Like, what are you doing? And he was struggling. He was going through his own mental health crisis, and he needed to step away for a while. So he came back in, I think it was end of April, or sorry, no, it was July. Yeah, June he died. I think it was in the beginning of May. We sat down and did an episode with him and my other co-host at the time, and we talked about his shit. And then he went on his way, and a month later he's dead. And I had not talked to him except for over the phone. And I found out in a pretty shitty way. I was up in Rochester, New York, which is about 400 miles from Pittsburgh, and I was driving a cryogenics trailer back, and I get the phone call that he died. And I remember pulling over on the side of the road and just sitting there like I can't believe this is happening. And I still have, 5.5 hours to drive. And I didn't cry. I didn't break down right there. But once I made it back to my terminal yard in Pittsburgh, I didn't even get through the gate before I completely broke down and started crying. And I cried once, and it was deep and it was dark and it was painful. And then, was like, I got to move on. Like I can't sit in this moment because that's what I would have done in the past, is just sit there and regret of all the things I didn't do and all the things I should have done. And, how I was a dick sometimes and how I didn't give him, his fair credit sometimes, and all the shit that we think about when we lose somebody. And then just dove right back into the podcast. And at this point now, like everything I do on this podcast is in his memory, because it wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Kenny Finnegan. And without him, it's not complete. But, hopefully he looks down and sees what we're doing here and approves of it and is happy for us. But yeah, I mean, 2 years later, I'm sober, just bought a house about 2 months ago. I'm getting married in 3 weeks. It's been a hell of a journey. It's been rock bottom several times, and then rock bottom's basement several times. And, I've got a lot of, I've left a lot of damage behind me. I've left a lot of dumpster fires behind me. I've also, hurt a lot of people and done a lot of shitty things. And, I think one of the biggest things that's kept me sober to this point is the fact that I finally had to come to terms with me. I had to do a very deep evaluation of myself. And in AA, one of the guys that I met down there said something very poignant to me that's always stuck with me. And he's like, you're not a bad person, Mark. You're just a sick person trying to get well. And, some people say it's a cop out, but I believe that 100%. Addiction is an illness. It is. It's what it is. And like every other illness, you sacrifice things for that illness. You give things to that illness. You lose things to that illness. And one of the things I lost was my humanity and my empathy. And one of the things I'm most grateful for now is that, I'm still an asshole. I'll always be one. But now I want to put other people's struggles before mine. I want to help others, even if it's just talking. Talking is one of the most powerful tools for us to get through recovery. This podcast that I do, it's about giving people a platform where they still feel safe to say whatever they want to say and talk about whatever they want to talk about without being judged, and knowing that everything that we say and do on this podcast is hopefully going to help one person. If we help one person, I'm happy. If you listen to my story and go, this guy's a douchebag and he's a giant whackhead, like, that's fine. Don't do what I did. Like, my path to recovery is not a good one. I should be dead. There's no doubt in my mind I should be dead. But now, I surround myself with great people. I have an amazing fiance who I love to death and wouldn't survive this world without her. I wouldn't still be sober without her. Her support is phenomenal. I've got my dogs, I've got my house, I've got my studio in my apartment. I've got all kinds of things that I can look forward to every day. Where before I just didn't pay attention to anything. It was just, where's my booze? Get out of my face. Let me drink. So, folks, if that's my story. That's pretty much the nuts and bolts of it.
Man, I appreciate you sharing all that with me. Here we are, we're 40 minutes into our conversation together, and a few minutes ago you shared how you did not want to talk or share your story with anybody. And
Nope.
I appreciate your courage and vulnerability. I think that it's so challenging to move forward with what we feel like we're called to do sometimes, because we limit ourselves based off of what we think we're capable of. But what can be so beautiful is just stepping into that fear with courage and seeing what happens, because the goal is to help one person, like you were talking about. And I think that is so, it's really beautiful to be able to sit here and listen to where you're at today, knowing where you've been. And we've only talked 2 times, but I feel like I can relate with you as a human. I genuinely feel like that, and I appreciate you and what you're doing with your podcast, and also recognizing the brothers that are not with you today and honoring them with what you're doing right now and the mission that you're on. So I'm sure they're looking down, grateful for what you're doing.
I hope so. I mean, one of the things I've learned, and I've learned a lot in the last 2 years, I've learned that I'm a narcissist. I've learned that I'm selfish and put myself first above everybody else, like all the bad things. But there's a couple things that happen in recovery. One is you make amends, and you make amends with yourself. You forgive yourself for what you can, and you look forward to doing something better with your life, something selfless. Service work. That's the biggest part of my recovery, and that's the podcast. This is my service. Talking. Excuse me, saying what's on my chest. After that first therapy session where I actually started telling real Mark Kneebone shit, the floodgates were open. Like I couldn't understand why I'd never talked before. And I think back on it, and I think one of the biggest things that makes sense to me is that everybody when I got sober said, "You're so strong. You're so strong to be doing this." I know so many people that are in addiction and they never get any help. I was like, "I'm not strong. I'm weak." And over the last 2 years, I've learned that you're not weak for asking for help. You are weak for not accepting the help that's given. Why would I ever tell somebody, "No, I don't want your help"? Because on the flip side, what they're doing is helping them in their recovery from whatever they're dealing with. Helping isn't a one-way street. It's not just helping the receiver, it's helping the giver. And that's a big proponent of AA is the service work, because once you get yourself straight, you got to help other people get straight, right? You got to help other people navigate the waters of early addiction recovery and navigate the waters of poor mental health. And, I think it's people like you, John, and me, and Drew Moore with the Sober Fix podcast, and Drifter with the Sober Town podcast, the people that are doing this for the right reasons. I think there's a lot of people out there that are doing it to make money and to build a name for themselves. And to me, that's unjust, and it's lies. You may have a good message, but in this space that we are dealing with, in this podcast and social media space, there's so many phonies. And there's so many people that are doing it with the just reason of helping others and sharing the message that you're never alone. There is help for you if you're willing to take it. And there's always somebody that'll take your hand if you give it to them, and I think that's one of the hardest things, in law enforcement, first responders, veterans, one of the hardest things to admit is that you need help, because we've been taught to rub some dirt on it and just get over it. Like, you got a mission, you've got a job, do it. Just suck it down and do it. And I think that culture needs to change. I think the culture of the stigma of you're weak if you have a mental health issue. You're not weak. You're strong. You're strong because you deal with it. You're strong because you live through it. You're strong because you find a way to survive. But just being strong isn't enough. Just being clean isn't enough. Just having good mental health isn't enough, because if you're not happy, if you don't accept yourself, none of the work you do matters. None of the helping matters, because in the end, you're faking it. You know, sobriety and clean mental health without happiness, that's 90% of the world. You know, struggling through the day every day to get shit done, going, yeah, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. Like, no, you're not good, bro. You're not happy. Like, I got a smile on my face all the time now. I worked 14 and a half hours yesterday. I got 4 hours sleep. I don't give a shit. Like, I'm happy. You know, I went up and fixed a vent on my house today. I'm happy. I get to wake up every day. I didn't swallow that bullet when I had the opportunity.
Mm.
You know, and I think if one person that watches any of these podcasts on mental health, recovery, self-help, personal growth, motivational podcasts, if you take one thing away from any of them, it is that you're never alone, and that all you have to do is reach, because there's always going to be a hand out there that's going to grab yours and help you through those troubled waters, man. You can't be afraid. You can't let stigmas and you can't let the opinions of others factor into your survival. And that's what it is. Mental health and addiction is a war. It is a war of attrition. And it goes to the victor who fights the hardest and fights the longest. And my friend, hopefully we do a podcast in 20 years when I'm still sober and we talk about the same shit. Because, you know, the guy in front of you see now isn't the guy that was here 2 years ago. That guy died in rehab and was reborn.
Thank you for sharing, man. Appreciate that.
Always, brother. Always. It's great to be here. It's great to share this platform with you.
Yeah. Thank you. I reflect back on what I wanted this podcast to be for. And initially, I started this because there were so many things that I learned while volunteering for momentary discomfort in the form of ultra marathons, because I knew I needed to survive. The only desire that I had was to end my life. I was flooded with suicidal and morbid ideations, and the only thing that felt right was volunteer for something that will give me an opportunity to either survive or die. And if I die running an ultra marathon, okay, fine. Like, I'll go out with some dignity. That's what I was thinking. I was like, I'm rattled. Like, I don't know if why I'm doing what I'm doing is healthy. I didn't know. It was rooted out of suffering that I was going through. And that suffering was internal feeling of hopelessness and despair. And it was a true survival strategy, which I think when we're talking about like identifying our strength, my strength wasn't in my capability of running extreme distances, and it wasn't in any of my physical capabilities by any means, but I felt stronger the more vulnerable I became, and the more aware I was of how rattled as a person I was. Like that is what I feel confident in, if that makes sense.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I feel so much stronger internally when I talk about how real I am as a person. And I'm not sitting on this platform thinking that I figured everything out. The more I talk, the more I realize the less I know, but I say that with humility, if that makes sense. Like, I'm just a guy who at one time in my life cared about people, and then I stopped caring about other people because all I cared about was me, and I found no satisfaction, and I found a desire to end my life, and rationalizing why it would be okay for my 2-year-old to grow up without a dad. And I convinced myself like that was okay. And then God showed up, and I do believe that God works in mysterious ways. And my friend asked me to run an ultra marathon. I said, okay. even though I knew, I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense to me, because 2 days ago I knew what an ultra was, and I was talking with a friend and I said, that's impossible. It's not for me. But for some reason, it made sense in that moment of despair to lean into that, because I was like, well, if I have 2 months to train for this ultra marathon, then I've got 2 more months to live. So I took it day by day, and it turned into still a beautiful journey, but the journey's changed. The way that I look at life is different from 2 years ago. 2 years ago, it was a survival strategy to survive every single day because I didn't know what else to do. And now I reflect on this podcast. And initially, I wanted it to be a platform for other people who ran ultra marathons to sit and talk about life lessons through the ultra trail. And I was like, yes, that's partial, but what it's turned into is so much more. And it's very humbling. I feel so grateful to be able to sit here and know that, like, I get to have a conversation with you today and hear where you're at and where your journey started and where it's going. Like, this has grown into something that's really just trying to encourage the hurting human and tell people, like, you're not alone through whatever trash you're going through. Other people have gone through suffering. Other people will go through suffering, which is the truth. We're all going to struggle for the rest of our lives. And what is very grounding is acknowledging, like, the work will never end. It's so easy for me to get overwhelmed thinking about the work that I can break this down into two different lanes. The work that I have to put in so that I can maintain my holistic strength, so I can maintain wellness, or I can look at it from a different perspective and take a breath, experience some peace, and recognize I don't have to allow myself to become overwhelmed by the work that I get to put in. Like, I get to work on my wellness every single day, but I'm going to compartmentalize everything to right here, right now. I only have today. I've been rambling a lot. I hope that this is
No, no.
making
I
some
think I think
sense.
I think what you're saying is very important because that you're talking about survival mode. I mean, that's what addicts and alcoholics are in 24/7, right? That's what people who are suffering from poor mental health are in. Everybody has a survival strategy, as you put it. Everybody has a way to get through, to be functional, to be okay. But when you fight the fight and you start to see the changes within, you start to refocus your viewpoint and be like, well, I was okay. That wasn't any fun. Like, there's so many more things I can do with my life if I can start thinking logically again. And, I'm glad you didn't give into those suicidal thoughts because, we wouldn't be having this conversation and you wouldn't be doing this great work, and it'd be another soul lost to something that can be healed, that can be treated. Um, you know, for you, it's ultra marathon running. For me, it literally was going OCD about a podcast. Like, just we fill our lives once the top of that can is opened up, right, and all the shit that we've stored starts to seep out of the top and starts to come to the surface, and we start to approach it surgically and with a plan of how we're going to attack it. And we start to see the changes that we go through. We start to see how, well, this bothered me yesterday, but it doesn't bother me as much today. Oh, I woke up today, I stubbed my toe off the dresser. Well, before I would probably be pissed off all day, but now I'm just got a sore toe. I'm going to go to work. I'm okay. Like, the fatalistic mentality of, like, this is the end. If this happens, it's over. That goes away. And we start filling that empty void that was our poor mental health and our suicidal thoughts. We start to fill that with productive and beneficial activities. For you, is ultra marathon running. For me, it's going out, cutting the grass, cutting down a tree in my backyard. It's going to the gym. It's whatever it has to be. It's never the same for me.
Mhm.
Every day is different. I have my basic plan: get up, go to work, come home. Kiss my girlfriend, give her a hug, love my dogs, treat people with respect. Don't be a dickhead.
Mhm.
The recipe's there, right? And the recipe over time changes. I started off with my podcast. It was literally addiction and mental health. That's all I wanted to talk about. And over the last year, it's become, I talk about law enforcement. I'll talk a little bit about politics, but we do still talk primarily about mental health and addiction. But it's evolved. It's grown. It's grown with my recovery. In the beginning, I needed to talk about addiction and mental health every day, because if I didn't, I would fall back into my old me. But now, like you said, I don't have all the answers. If I come on here and act like I got the answers, and I'm full of shit, and anybody
Mhm.
who says they have all the answers, you're full of shit too.
Mhm.
Because every conversation I have on this podcast, every conversation I have with another human, every interaction I have to learn something from that. You know, I just had a post up yesterday because, everybody's always talking that like law enforcement are held to a higher standard. And is it actually a higher standard, or is it the standard?
Mhm.
Accountability, respect, professionalism, unbiased approach. Like we as humans have lost track of what our purpose is, you know, individually and as a whole. Like, our purpose is not to take over the world. Our purpose is to help others. Our purpose is to live a good life so that you teach others that you can accomplish anything in your life if you live a good life. And to each person, that's different. A good life's different. For you, it's ultra marathon running, and for me, it's not eating cheese and crackers today, and not eating chocolate.
Mhm.
Like, it's funny when you start to deal with the demons that we all deal with. When we start to let those demons out just enough that we can confront them, like, the horizon changes. It's no longer dark and hazy, but now it's sunny and pink and beautiful. And I go golfing. It's one of my favorite
Mhm.
things to do. When I went golfing before, I was always drunk.
Mhm.
Now when I go golfing, I look at my girlfriend, because I take her with me every time, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so beautiful out here today. And most of my friends that see this are going to call me gay, but that's okay. But it is. It's like, now I go golfing because I like to be outside,
Mhm.
because I'm paying attention and being present in the moment, and not thinking about the future, not thinking about the past. And I think it's so hard for those of us who suffer with mental health and other issues. It's so hard for us to be present. It's so hard for us to focus on the here and the now. And my friends, I got to tell you, if you're not focusing on the present, you're not there for everybody else. If you're always worried about making the same mistakes, or if you're always worried about what mistake you're going to make next, where's happiness? Where's content? Where's serenity? Where's enjoying the time that we have, the finite time we have on this planet with our family and our friends and our pets? I think once again, it comes down to, we've all been taught from a very young age the wrong way. We've been taught to look out for ourselves. We've been taught that I have to succeed. Well, what's success? Is it money? Is it cars? Or is it a happy family, a nice house that you put money and work into, and a very comfortable life that you enjoy waking up every day? What is happiness to each person? And I think communication, what we're doing, is key to hopefully starting to get people to open their minds. But at the end of the day, this is the human condition. I mean, that we're humans, right? We don't give each other the humanity that they deserve. We like to selectively accept people for whatever characteristics we like, and whatever things we find that we can mesh with, and then we discount the ones that are different. AA, those are my people. I've searched my entire life for a group of people that I fit in with, and guess what? It's drug users and alcoholics with mental health issues. That's who I fit in with. And I'm not ashamed to say it. They're
Mhm.
great people, but these are the lessons we learn if we're willing to open our eyes and learn. And I think, moving forward in this world that we live in, the selfishness needs to end. The humanity needs to be brought back. And I know it sounds hippie-ish and whatever you want to say, but I honestly feel that, like, if we would just treat people with the same dignity and respect that we expect to get treated with, the golden rule, things are better.
Mhm.
And granted, for me, I had to get sober to do that. I couldn't do it when I was drinking. I couldn't do it when I wasn't taking care of my mental health. Like, I'm medicated now. That's okay
Mhm.
to say.
Mhm.
I'm medicated. Big deal. It's not a bad thing. You know, I haven't had a drink since May 4th of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. I mean, I don't count every day. No, I live every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Just live. That's all I got.
Love it. Love it. I think that major theme that I'm wanting to lean into, because this is something that I think we all need to be reminded of, is the impact of community. If we go back to, some research that I did when I was in a psychology class a few years ago, we're talking about primal time. And ultimately, what I'm trying to get at is the positive impact of community. Because right now in our culture, I think that a disservice that we're doing to ourselves is being as independent as we are, because we can be so independent. We can be so self-sufficient. Like, people can physically live independently with their own devices. Like, we're capable. But if we look back to our history, primal time, community, like, people need one another to survive, and people needed to depend on one another. And I do like how, kind of getting to a point in culture where, like, just so you know, I'm a verbal processor, so I say things out loud, and then sometimes I change my mind. I'm allowed to do that because I'm a person.
And it's your show.
But yeah, I just think that it's so important to recognize, like, and I'm saying all this because I'm sitting in the garage in my apartment. I'm like, well, I pay for all this. I buy my own groceries. I do my own things. Like, I'm doing this all on my own. But what gives me, like, satisfaction is knowing that, like, I get to live in community with people. If I was doing it only for me, I'm not satisfied. I'm not content, because that's how I was years ago. Like, I was only thinking about the future. I was only thinking about me. But now, what feeds my soul is doing the things that I'm doing because there's a lesson to learn, and I get to share that with other people and hope that what I'm sharing, it resonates with someone who needs to hear it.
I mean, I agree. Community is very important. That's why AA was such a big part of my recovery and still is. Now I go to AA to see people that I've met, to see how they're doing and what's going on in life. I don't have, like, I'm not perfect, but I don't have a lot of shit to worry about right now. Like, I pay my bills. I'm not really stressed out about things right now, and that could change daily. But, you know, AA is a community. It's a fellowship. It's people that share experiences and suffering and can come together to lean on each other. And I think, as you said, in this culture, we've been pushed towards uh, delineation and separation. You know, well, you're a white male, so you're here. You're a trans female, so you're here. You're a black male, so you're here. You're Asian, so you're here. You're blue collar, you're middle class, you're poverty. Like, all these things, our culture has built for us to keep us in our lane,
Mm.
right? And why? Like, what's the point? You know, and I think it's going to be a question that we're asking each other when we're 90. Unfortunately, I don't think this gets better to the rate that we would love to see it. I think it's, folks like you and me and the other people out there that are willing to put their emotions and their thoughts on the line. It's going to take more of us doing what we're trying to do to open people's eyes to the fact that the world isn't about you. It's not about me. It's about us. You know, I didn't ruin the environment, but we as a culture have. I didn't, destroy the ozone layer, but we did as a culture. All these things we've done together, but we've done separately. Living in our lane, worrying about us. And I think that comes back to the base principle of, you know, it needs to be about us. It needs to be about communication. It needs to be about honesty, truth, and the righteousness of caring about others more than you care about yourself. And that doesn't mean forget about yourself. It just means, hey, you're at the store. There's a guy in front of you. He's $3 short for his groceries. Hey, bro, here. Don't worry about it. It's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Pay it forward. I mean, it's the little things. When you come out of recovery, out of treatment in the recovery, they always talk about service work. And like, you're thinking like, I got to go to meetings. I got to go out to the grocery store and hang out and pass out flyers. It's hold the door for a 90-year-old lady. It's help her across the street. It's, oh, somebody's looking for their dog in your neighborhood. Don't turn the other way. Go help them. It's little shit that we do on a daily that will slowly but surely change the world and make it a better place to live in. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be better across the board, but it's going to be better in my world. When I do a good thing for someone else, I feel good about myself. So there's a little bit of selfish motivation in there. But I mean, I think like you said, it's we as a culture have become so comfortable worrying about ourselves first and then not caring about anybody else, family, friends, whatever. But like the guy on the street that's sitting at, the street corner who's homeless and he's a war vet, like it's, it may not be his fault that he's there, but don't just lump that guy in a category as being a piece of shit because he's there. He's a human,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's the selflessness has to be returned to our plan of action.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very long struggle,
Mm-hmm.
but people like you who, I love the way you think about it. I love the idea is beautiful, right? Utopia is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But all we can do as humans is continue to fight the good fight and, put things out there for people to think about and talk about things that people don't want to talk about. Because when we bring those demons to light, we may help somebody. We may help somebody see that there's a better way.
Mm-hmm.
May not be my way, may not be your way, but it's a better way,
Mm-hmm.
And I just,
Process.
I'm not a very religious person, but I do believe that there is a plan for all of us. And I don't believe it's a plan just for me and just for you, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
plan for us as a culture, as a race. And hopefully, we can all get on track at some point and start giving a shit about the person to our left and our right and not
Mm-hmm.
worry so much about the guy in the middle.
Yeah. Lately, I've been really leaning into living a values-based lifestyle because have said this before. Like, I used to think that I live on a treadmill, like I'm just doing and just going and doing the next thing. And what is the next thing that I need to do so that I can feel satisfaction or I can feel validation, recognition, or whatever it may be that I was feeling that I needed. But the Air Force put me through, well, I volunteered for a resilience training instructor course. And I absolutely loved it. It was a 4-day course, or maybe 3. Can't remember. But one of the first things that we did was an exercise so that we can determine what our top values were. And it's like a light bulb turned on. I was like, oh, hold on. I have a whole list of all these values that I'm leaning into. And I was just sharing this with a friend earlier. I was talking about, like, if someone asked me what I think I'm good at, there's only one thing that I would say I'm actually good at. And I believe that God gifted me with compassion. And that's the only thing. Besides that, like, I wouldn't say that I'm good at anything, but compassion is number one on my list of values. And ultimately, like, what it could mean is just the recognition of other people's suffering, period. And if we just recognize that other people are suffering, which is all of us in some way, physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, then I think about how can I help other people? And that's what brings me to, like we were saying, service or our mission. And whenever I get on my treadmill or if I'm on a trail, like, I have an internal goal of however many miles I want to run every day. And it, to me, like, the number doesn't matter, but the time matters. I'm like, I am volunteering for this momentary discomfort because when I accomplish this goal, I am going to be a healthier human for the sake of others. If I don't, all the anxiety, all the pressure, all the weight that I have on me, it will disperse to other people. And I'm not as compassionate if I don't volunteer for that discomfort, if that makes sense. It's kind of an interesting thing, but I am a healthier person when I train every single day. So that's kind of a mental thing that allows me to overcome that obstacle of not wanting to do it. In the first place, I'm like, well, if you just do it, check that box, it's going to allow you to be a healthier person. And the ripple effect of that is healthier. And I've said this analogy before, but I like to think of the impact that we leave is a ripple effect. So by you and I having this conversation right now, like think of the impact this could leave on those who listen. Like that's us dropping a rock in the lake. And I think that this is going to be a healthy impact that we're leaving for those that listen. And it's going to create a healthy ripple effect. But if you and I just gave each other a fist bump, it's like, hey, what's up, dude? Like, peace and love. See you later. Like, maybe that's a small rock. Like, what are we actually doing? And that ripple effect dissipates quickly and it doesn't leave a lasting impact. So that's my encouragement to people that are listening to this is compassion, like recognize other people's suffering and leave an impact that's lasting.
I mean, there's a huge component to that. It's something that people don't pay attention to, but it's being inherently and blatantly self-aware
Mm-hmm.
of who you are as a person and what makes you tick. And I think, people like you and I who have suffered with our demons, I think the self-awareness becomes much more in the forefront for us because the minute we're not aware of where we are and who we are, we take the risk of slipping back into what we were. And I think that's huge. And I think, I agree with you 100%. Everything we do in this world affects multiple people around us, whether we know it or not. So putting good into the world and putting truth and honesty and reality into the world for other people to hear, I think it does have a ripple effect. I agree with you 100%. I think, whether it helps one person or 10, or if it's just people listening and going, hey, I got a buddy that might want to watch this, or hey, I got a buddy that might want to hear what he has to say. It's a beautiful existence once you get outside of yourself,
Mm.
and it's a very hard thing to do. It takes a lot of work and a lot of maintenance. But
Mm-hmm.
once you start that path, once you start that journey, when you see the changes and you see how things just get so much better, you never go back. You never want to go back to what it was before. And like I said before, I think you're doing something great. I think you're going to go far with this. I think, your viewers appreciate what you're doing. There's no doubt.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, I have a few more questions for you before we transition. The first thing that I'd like to know from you, and a lot of this is something that's already been said by you, but I really like to transition through the conversation with just final words of encouragement or just a few extra words of encouragement, recognizing that whoever is listening, like I've said before, we're all struggling in some way, some capacity. But what is it that you have for the listener who's struggling, going through that hard time right now? How can you encourage them?
Well, failure is part of the process. We're going to take our lumps. We're going to make mistakes. But if you keep the goal in mind of what you want to accomplish, whether it's sobriety or clean mental health or run ultra marathons or just be a better person, I think there's a couple things that have to happen. And one is that we have to be self-aware. We have to know who we are. We have to know how we tick and what makes us tick. And we also have to understand that we're not the only thing that matters. A big thing in alcoholism is control. And as humans, we try to control everything. And once we give up that control, we allow change to happen. Control is like a roadblock to change. So I think the most important thing to leave people with is that you're not weak for asking for help. You're stronger than anybody you know, and you're never alone. I mean, that's the fact. You're never alone. I learned the hard way. You're never alone. There's always someone that either understands what you're going through or has a way to help. So don't continue to suffer because you're afraid to fail. It's just part of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on a planet of 8.1 billion people, if we were supposed to live in isolation, I think things would be a little different. We wouldn't have this many people on planet Earth that we get to share life with. So for me, I think it's really important to recognize that isolation should not exist on a planet of 8.1 billion people. And I promise there is someone out there who can relate with you on whatever the struggle is that you're going through that's listening to this right now. So hope you take that as some final words of encouragement. And then the final question I like to ask I'll say friends. I like to ask my friends who come on this platform, but for me, I think about phase one and what that means to me. And phase one was really more of a question that I asked myself when I was leaning into momentary discomfort. I was doing something I didn't want to do, but I knew I needed to do it. And it really was the invitation to a survival strategy just to make it through the day. I would wake up and ask myself, all right, man, like, what's your phase one? How are you going to survive today? And by the time I went to sleep, I would reflect back on the day and recognize in humility my flaws, but then learn from those lessons and try to be a healthier human for the future. So I am curious, what does phase one mean to you, my friend?
Acceptance. It means that it's okay to not be okay. I think if you wake up every day and you can say that to yourself, then you've got a chance. I think if you wake up in the morning and go, oh, I've got it figured out, you've already lost.
Mm.
And that's coming from a mental health and addiction standpoint, of course, because that's what I know the most about when it comes to me. I think, if we think we've got it figured out, that's when we open the doors for failure. And I mean failure in a big way, as in like ending up dead or, your addiction taking over or your poor mental health taking over. So I think if we can wake up, if we can live our lives being okay, not being okay, I think that's the first step to being healthy and happy.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Thanks, man. No wrong answer with that question. I love hearing what people have to say. Oh yeah, you passed. Yeah, man. Yeah, man, I appreciate your time and your willingness to be real with me for a time and just share your story, your mission and your message. If there's people that are listening right now and they want to stay connected with you, how can they find you?
SteelCroundtablepodcast.com. Our email is steelcityroundtable@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, major social platforms. But if you want to follow the podcast, the website's the easiest way to do it, or just go to YouTube.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I really appreciate you.
Thanks, brother. Keep doing what you're doing.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, peace, love, keep it real.